Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of In the Mix with Heilman and Haver. We're glad you joined us. In the last couple episodes of our podcast, we've talked about inclusion in theater on stage and screen, and today we're going to celebrate a couple of our favorite inclusive, diverse movies with a couple of cocktails that Mr. Heilman has created on our behalf, and we're excited to taste those, and we're going to talk a little about some of our favorite diverse movies, inclusivity in Hollywood, and a few other topics that we think you'll enjoy. Hopefully you had a chance to listen to our podcast on December 11th. We talked to members of the OCA Running Man Theater Company, and it was a fantastic interview. It's a fantastic group, very inspiring work that they're doing with actors, specifically with special needs. So make sure to check that out. Again, that's December 11th, episode number 7.
And then this coming week on December 18th, we're going to be interviewing Sarah Summers, who is in Hollywood. And she's going to talk about her path to Hollywood and some of the work she's done. But she's also going to talk a little bit about a subject that's near and dear to her, body positivity on stage and film. So that's going to continue our inclusivity series. And be sure to look for that published later this week. So we're going to talk about our top 5 inclusive films.
Yep.
A little bit about what we think makes a film inclusive. A little bit about history in Hollywood, of how Hollywood, I think it's pretty obvious, hasn't always been inclusive.
No.
We talked about, actually, on episode 1 of Heilman and Haver, when we had Jeffrey Bassett here, about the Academy's upcoming rules around inclusivity, cast, crew, things like that. So if you get a chance, go back and listen to our episode 1, where we kind of introduced the idea of inclusivity and diversity in film. But we're going to talk about our top 5. We're going to make a drink that has to that's related to each of our top number 1 inclusive films. So I'm going to get started on mine, which is, and I won't tell you the film, but I'm going to, well, you'll be able to guess the film by the name of the cocktail. So it's the Heart of Wakanda cocktail. So, gee, guess what my number 1?
Yeah, don't leave us hanging.
So my number 1 is going to be Black Panther. I will talk about that a lot in a little bit. So right now I'm going to do that. I'm going to mix we're going to mix 2 ounces of vodka. And I'm going to make these, since we've got 2 of us here.
And as with on the podcast, all of our cocktail recipes will be listed in the show notes. This is on YouTube, so check it out in the notes below so you can enjoy along with us.
Good thing to have a backup here. So I am doing, each drink is 2 ounces of vodka. I'm doubling these, obviously, because we've got 2 people here. So 2 ounces of vodka. We're going to do grenadine here. So this calls for actually quite a bit of grenadine.
The more the merrier.
More the merrier. So I'm going to use 4 ounces of grenadine. Blue curaçao. So each drink calls for...
This is going to be a colorful one.
I am going to add a little bit more just to get a little bluer. And then a splash of lemon juice. It's actually, the recipe calls for a splash of lemonade. I'm using just lemon juice, a little bit in there.
A little bit of bitterness.
Yep.
It's okay.
And then some lemon lime soda, which I am obviously not going to include in the shaking. So I'll add that later. So I'm going to put that into there. That's better.
So did you see this movie in question in the theaters?
We did, yes. We saw it in theaters. See, it's on Disney Plus, and they've got a nice tribute to late Chadwick Boseman.
Now you've really given it away.
On the version. Well, yeah, I already said Black Panther, right? So it's more blue. It's supposed to be more purple, but perhaps grenadine isn't necessarily.
We'll fix it in post. It'll look purple by the time you guys see it.
Yeah, so
all right,
cheers.
Oh boy, that is good.
And you know what I forgot to do?
Really sweet.
I forgot to put the lemon lime soda in there.
So well, top me off.
Do a little bit of bubbliness to
right.
it. All right.
Try that again. Mellowed out the sweetness a little bit.
Yep.
Add a little bit of fizz. You can certainly top this cocktail with an umbrella. Some kind of fancy garnish. Look at that color. Mm.
All right. Well, cheers.
Yeah, cheers. And
All right.
tell us about Black Panther. It's
So,
obviously been in the news a lot.
yeah, for sure. So, interesting story with Black Panther. And there's the obvious diversity element to it. Black superhero. I mean, that comes back from the comic books. And Marvel has always been a group to try and be as inclusive as possible and make sure that they're representative of not only a diverse group. There's women superheroes, there's black superheroes, there's Asian superheroes, and Marvel Studios is trying to follow that along as well. So they've got between Captain Marvel, Black Panther, they've got the some Asian representation. I cannot remember the name of the upcoming movie with the Asian superheroes, but
we'll put that in the show notes too.
Yeah, absolutely. So Shai Chin or something like that, but I don't want to misspeak. So regardless of that, there's also themes of the social gap between the haves and have-nots within Black Panther. So there's Wakanda, that's a rich community. There's the question about why aren't they sharing their technology and their money and their that with the rest of the community, while there's other black populations that are struggling around the world. So it's a layered film when it comes to diversity and
elements of class in there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really a more complex thing, which is why it was nominated for Best Picture. So more first superhero film really to be nominated for Best Picture. So it's a deep layered film. There's also an interesting backstory that it almost didn't get made because in China, black movies or movies with black casts don't do so well in China. China's a huge box office.
Yeah, big market.
So Disney, Marvel, it's a business, and they need to grow year over year, financially. So there was some pressure on Bob Iger, CEO at the time, not to produce the movie because you're not going to sell merchandise in China. People aren't going to go in China to see it, so why do it? But Bob thought it was important enough to get out there. So, because it's, you want to be able to look at the screen and little kids of all colors and races and nationalities want to be able to look at the screen and say, hey, I can be a superhero too, or I can do anything. And it was important enough to Iger to have that representation on screen that he pushed for it, despite advisors throughout the company telling him not to do that. And I mean, it made a ton of money. It did really well. And I thought it was well done. Ryan Coogler, as a director, did a phenomenal job making sure that it wasn't, and this is a theme that I've got in a few of my top 5 picks, is that not only does it have a cast of a certain race or color or sexual orientation, but the challenges of those folks, those underrepresented folks, are detailed in the film. So
I also feel like in a lot of ways, Black Panther was a linchpin film for a lot of the conversations we're having now about diversity, such as, excuse me, the Academy's new regulations and requirements for Best Picture, things like that. So it seems like Black Panther did an awful lot to move the conversation forward.
It did. And it's from screenwriters to and as I go through my top 5 here, so I'll go through my top 5 and I'll kind of show what in that what I think makes a film diverse or inclusive. So
have a drink.
Yeah, I will.
Delicious. Yeah, that is so good.
So other than Black Panther being I think my top 1, these next ones are in no particular order. So number 5, I'm gonna throw Moana out there, and I mentioned Disney, along with Marvel, try to be inclusive and as diverse as possible. Moana is an interesting story because the directors of the film spoke with the Disney Imagineer Joe Rohde, who was the lead Imagineer behind the Animal Kingdom theme park. One of his guiding principles is realism, and so you go to Animal Kingdom, and I don't want this to be a commercial for for a Disney theme park, but you go into Animal Kingdom, and yes, it's entertainment. Yes, it's a theme park, and there's attractions and rides and things like that. But every piece of architecture that you see there is something that is directly influenced and a lot of times produced by someone in Africa or Asia, and has been imported or, as I said, influenced. So he has been, Joe Rohde traveled the world, got a lot of these influences. The directors of Moana, John Musker and Ron Clements, went to Joe and said, hey, how do we take this film that we're going to do and make it the most realistic possible and make sure that we aren't just making these Polynesian caricatures.
Yeah, a parody of the culture.
Exactly. So he sat down with them and said, hey, you've just got to go to the culture themselves. You've got to talk to people. You've got to understand the people and the culture and bring that in. So I think they did a really good job with Moana. You have to look at Maui. So Maui, a real demigod, the tattoos that he's got all over his body mean something, and it's part of the culture. So to those kind of details, I think they did a fantastic job bringing that to life. So I think that's, when I talk about an inclusive film, I think a lot of it's research. And I think, might have that in some of your films, Matt, but you've got to make sure that when you look at doing a film, it's got to be authentic. It's got to be relatable. It can't be a caricature. So
accurate.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's my number 5. Moving on to the next one, I have Crazy Rich Asians, which is a comedy. And here we talk about, again, as we talked about with Black Panther, there's a Asian screenwriter, Asian director, Asian cast, and it is a comedy, but it's also got those issues that Asian people can relate to, and you need to be able to see. It can't just be Asian people on the screen dealing with white people problems,
right?
Because that's just not going to really resonate with the Asian community. So again, you need to be able to say, and the other thing with that is, if I'm a young Asian person and I'm looking at Hollywood and I'm thinking that I'm not going to be, how can I be a director or a producer? They're all, a certain type of person, certain white and, whichever. Then I look at this and I see the opportunities there to be a writer or a director or star in a major Hollywood film. So that was, I think that's why I have Crazy Rich Asians on my list. Next, I have Children of a Lesser God. Children of a Lesser God is a film in which Marlee Matlin won an Oscar for Best Actress in a Leading Role. Obviously hearing impaired, and her character was hearing impaired. She's hearing impaired. It was the first time I remember seeing a film in which an actor had a disability that was playing someone with that disability. Yes, there's so many films out there where you have an actor without a disability playing someone with a disability, and I think there's examples of that on both of our lists. But it's the first time I remember having someone in that role that actually had that disability. She won the Oscar for it. She's a phenomenal actress, and it was the first time, I think, since 1926 that I've seen that a lead actor or actress was hearing impaired in a film, and that's why it's on my list, because I think where you can, if you've got a character with a disability, have someone who is an actor that has that disability, portray that person. So it doesn't just have to be someone who doesn't have a disability playing those roles. Finally on my list is I Am Sam. And here's an example on the other end of the spectrum where you have an actor, Sean Penn, playing someone with a disability, an intellectual or learning disability. And we go back to my point about Moana is doing research. So Sean Penn, I think, in my mind, knocked it out of the park by doing the research that he needed to do to make sure that he represented that role correctly. So that's what I think from what is a diverse or what is an inclusive film, diverse cast and crew, storylines that center on underrepresented groups, and also have those unique challenges that those groups have, so that you can look at the screen. If you're in that underrepresented group and you identify or you recognize what's on the screen, but also someone that's not in that group can learn, can maybe develop some empathy, and maybe that moves us closer to having those conversations and understanding between people that I think benefit us all.
I think what makes any movie powerful, or any story, whether it's on page, screen, stage, is your ability to identify and connect with those characters and say, that's me. That's what makes jokes funny. I can identify with that. Mm-hmm. And so the more opportunities we have, especially for young people, several of the movies on your list are opportunities for young people specifically to look up on screen and go, that's me.
Yep.
And I can aspire to that, whether it's being on screen, whether it's just the inspiration of the character themselves, or seeing that these roles behind the scenes are also being filled by people that look like them, that they identify with.
Absolutely. So that's my top 5. Number 1, again, Black Panther. Was just a phenomenal layered film with, a diverse cast, a storyline that dealt with social, racial issues, and was pushed by someone who thought it was important enough to put it out there that we all needed to see something like that. And I think we did.
And one delicious cocktail.
Definitely.
I hope you'll all try this one. Now it's Greg's turn to have a drink and my turn to chat for a little bit. We talked a little bit about disability. We've had guests on our show that work specifically with disabled and special needs actors and actresses. And in many ways, disability is a unique element of inclusion, diversity on screen, that may not be as simple to solve as some of the other issues that we've talked about, things like race, sexual orientation, gender, etc. If the script calls for an African-American actor, let's make sure that an African-American actor is cast. I know that I can probably speak for both of us when I say it's high time that we see a James Bond that is a color other than deeply tanned. Maybe this will be the year for that, or perhaps 007 will even be a female this time around. But we can, thankfully, the days of blackface, the days of even someone as talented as Sir Ben Kingsley playing someone like Gandhi are probably over. Nobody wants to see Johnny Depp play Tonto again, or much of anything anymore. So it's fairly easy to remedy some of these racial and gender faux pas that we've seen in the past on the big screen, and they're obviously long overdue. But that does bring us to the question about disabilities. Greg alluded to it earlier, and many of the most popular films, at least as far as the Academy is concerned, have involved folks with disabilities, stories about people with disabilities. In fact, as Variety reported last year, 2019, since 1988, 1/3 of Oscar's 30 lead actor winners were portraying a character with a disability. From Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man in 1989 through Eddie Redmayne, who played Stephen Hawking in 2015 in The Theory of Everything. So that's 10 in just one category. In contrast, like Greg also alluded to, there have only been 2 actors with disabilities, actual disabilities, in Oscar's entire 91 years that have won the award. So, something is obviously a little bit wrong there.
Yeah, I think, we were talking about this before, that when you're capturing, there's 2 types, right? There's capturing a certain point in time in an illness or disability, especially with a disability that progresses. Mm-hmm. When you talk about, Eddie Redmayne, sometimes there's things that progress, and you've got to represent that over time. It's maybe harder to do that with someone with that specific disability because they are at a specific point in time.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And in the context of disability specifically, that's the question that we would put to each other, that we put to you, our viewers, is what do you think makes a film diverse when it comes to a character or a story about someone with a disability? The Academy has changed their requirements for Best Picture to include something that a story that centers on the disabled, but they don't specify whether the disabled character should be played by an actual disabled actor or actress. So again, that really begs the question: is it enough to have a story about someone disabled, have a character about who's in a wheelchair, or does that person who's playing that role need to be in a wheelchair? Oh, thank you. And I was in doing our research for this segment. I ran across an interview with R.J. Mitty, who was the character, the actor that played the character Walter White Jr. on AMC's award-winning show Breaking Bad. R.J. has cerebral palsy, and he also had a very unique outlook on how these characters should be cast. He said that the most important thing in an industry that is so competitive already is that whoever is cast in these roles provide an accurate and honest portrayal of what that disability means. And I mean, I'm inclined to agree with that.
Yeah.
There are specific situations where the progression of a disease, the progression of a disorder, or the nature of the disorder itself does not lend itself to casting an actor with that same disability, if there is even one available, which is very, very unlikely. Of course, disabled actors should always be given a fair opportunity to audition for roles for stage and screen, and should be given those opportunities to play the roles whenever possible. But I think in order to tell certain stories, we have to accept that non-disabled actors are going to be cast. Otherwise, the stories don't get told, and that really does the disabled community a disservice. And on that same note, it also makes groups like OCA's Running Man Theater, go back and listen to our December 11th interview. 3 amazing women doing inspirational work with the special needs community. They cater specifically to special needs actors. And as I found out in some more research that I did, there are other theaters around the country doing similar things. And that brings me to the show that is my favorite, one of my favorites for stage, and my number one pick for an inclusive, diverse movie is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, based on the novel by Ken Kesey. It's very popular on stage, and it's one of those shows that lends itself to actually casting special needs actors, which I think is pretty cool. The other thing about the movie, starring Jack Nicholson, it won Jack his first Oscar, is that many of the extras in the film were actual patients of Oregon State Hospital. And that was something that was important to the people that were involved in the film. And many of the actors moved in and lived alongside these patients as they were preparing to make this film and just absorb that environment. So
yeah, so that takes two things that I spoke about earlier, right? It's the casting people with the disabilities, or with the in that situation that you're representing on the screen, and also research, right? Because
exactly.
It's all, to me, it's all about the research. If you're someone who's portraying, I mean, it's same for any role. There's always research involved, but especially when you're portraying a role with someone with a disability or something like that, there's a lot of, you got to do an extensive amount of research to make sure you represent it correctly.
Well, and just like the Academy, a lot of the films, actually all the films on my top 5, are about people with disabilities, learning disabilities, etc. And not all of them have been received extremely positively by by special interest groups and the disabled community that identify with those actors. On the other hand, there has been a lot of positives that have come from this. There was an article recently written by Wynn Goodfried, a PhD, who has a blog called Psychologists of the Movies, and she said that Cuckoo's Nest was a hugely important movie for the time because it helped bring attention to some hospitals with unethical practices or unsafe living conditions. Obviously not all mental hospitals, we don't have mental hospitals really anymore, but at the time were like you see portrayed in the film. But both the book and the movie are insightful views into societal problems such as stereotypes about people who have mental disorders. It casts the people in that film very sympathetically and obviously heroically in some instances. So you're going to see a lot of Jack Nicholson in my list. He's one of my favorites. But One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 1975, is definitely my number one. And Greg's going to now walk us through One Flew Over the COSMO'S Nest. It's a little play on words. You'll probably recognize this recipe. It's very similar to the standard Cosmo. Ice being collected here.
Ice being collected, yeah. So, again, we're going to get out of vodka. So, on our last in the mix, they were all gin drinks.
Right.
Today, they're all
making it very easy on you. And when in doubt, buy the big bottle. A couple interesting tidbits about Cuckoo's Nest. Well, for one, part of the reason I love the film is that it introduced us to some incredible actors that we would see a lot more in the future. Danny DeVito, Christopher Lloyd, and then Brad Dourif, who was nominated for Best, let's see here, let me make sure I get this right. He was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, which is, incidentally, ties into another film on my top 5. Jack Nicholson and Helen Hunt won the Best Oscar and Best Actress Oscars, respectively, for As Good as It Gets. That's also on my list. While Greg Kinnear was nominated for Best Actor in a Supporting Role. Nicholson is the only actor to date, as of 2017, to ever star in a film of which he would win the Oscar for Best Actor and would also receive a Best Actress Oscar. And also, there was a nomination for Best Actor in a Supporting Role. Previous one, obviously, Cuckoo's Nest. As I said before, the actors for this film moved into Oregon State Hospital ahead of time before the shooting started. And when Nicholson showed up on stage, as stars often do, last minute, he could not tell the difference between the actors and the...
Sorry.
That's okay. A necessary evil. But between the actors and the actual patients at the hospital, that was how committed these actors were. And in fact, there were a couple of actors who went so method with their roles that they began to develop mental issues and challenges throughout the shooting. Danny DeVito actually created a imaginary friend to keep himself busy, and of course without Rita Perlman nearby. And he had to have somebody to talk to off hours. But fantastic movie, great stage show, even better book. So check all 3 out whenever possible.
So you mentioned Jack. Is there something that drew him to these? I mean, obviously he's done a number of roles, but it's you're right. There's a commonality in some of the roles that he's taken where they deal with things like this.
Jack is he is a student of the old school, the method acting, and method has become recently has come to mean someone who lives as the character. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't necessarily apply to someone like Nicholson. But I think what does apply to him is a complete dedication to the character. And whether it's Randall Patrick McMurphy or any of his other characters, you see that complete commitment. He's also, like Greg Kinnear. He was actually scared to work with Nicholson in As Good as It Gets because he called Nicholson an actor of great unpredictability. But I think that's what makes Nicholson have the appeal that he does. And so, like you said, fit to these types of roles.
For sure.
Yeah. All right.
One Flew Over the COSMO'S Nest. Yeah.
That is citrusy and not quite as sweet as the last one.
Right.
So if you like a little bit more of a martini-ish bitter drink.
Yep. Yeah, those are the cranberry juice.
Yeah, it's really, really tasty though.
You get the cranberry juice. So recipe are it'll be posted on the in the show notes, but vodka, cranberry juice, triple sec, and lime juice. So obviously there's some tartness in there.
Delicious. So, like I said, some of the picks on my top 5 are, well, actually, all 5 involve a disability of some kind or another. I'm not alone in my enjoyment of these films. Most of them have won, I think all but one have won Oscar or multiple Oscars. So, again, not in any particular order. We'll go with the only real comedy on the list, 1989, See No Evil, Hear No Evil. I had to put this on here because I'm such a big Gene Wilder fan, and Richard Pryor as well. They did several movies together. I think this is one of their best. Unfortunately, it wasn't received very well by either the blind or deaf community, or really by critics. It's kind of a madcap comedy, and a lot of the setups, a lot of the plot do have to do with them, one being blind, one being deaf. But when you talk about accuracy and you talk about commitment to portraying characters realistically, Gene Wilder did do his homework while preparing for the role. He worked with the New York League of the Hard of Hearing. In fact, met his future wife there. Doing his homework. Number 4 for me is 1996's Sling Blade. a film that really, I don't think, got the credit that it really truly deserves. It's an incredible story. Billy Bob it was his directorial debut. He did get the Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay. He did not get it for Best Actor, although he did get the nomination. A couple of interesting points about that movie. Carl, the main character that Billy Bob played, was named after his special needs cousin, who unfortunately died months before. And he also wrote the movie and based a boy, the Carl character, on a boy that he knew as a child who ended up having polio. His parents didn't understand that and actually made the little boy live in a shed,
Wow.
much like the character. So there a lot of realism in that film. Another controversial one, another one that wasn't really well received by some of the folks that truly did suffer from this disability, was Scent of a Woman. Again, Nicholson comes up for this one, although this is a Pacino movie, and anytime we get a chance to talk about Pacino on this show, we do talk about Pacino. And I won't do any hoo-ahs, I promise, during this. But Nicholson said no to this role, and it went to Al, and it's arguably one of his finest, I think, most passionate performances. But a lot of folks felt that his portrayal of a disgruntled blind person did a disservice to the blind community in that it showed someone who was so upset about his disability that he became this very argumentative, very bitter, curmudgeonly character. That being said, when he accepted the Oscar for the film, he thanked the Manhattan Service Agency. Now, the Associated Blind Incorporated. It was a Manhattan Service Agency where he prepared for the role. He talked to blind people about their experiences. And Edgar Sternstein, the executive director of the agency, said he believed that many newly blinded people do go through a period of anger and bitterness at first. And he thought that Pacino played the blind character beautifully. He said it's an accurate representation from his point of view. So there obviously was some credibility there.
Yeah, I get that they, disability, related groups want a positive view on how they're portrayed, but honestly, I mean, to me, it's a myopic view. When you're there's people with disability that are acceptant and are have adapted and are resilient, but there's stages of that, and I think
acceptance.
Yeah, and I think to represent that, I think to not want that part of it represented is not is short-sighted.
Yeah, I think unrealistic.
Yeah,
because everyone's experience is different, and for sighted folks, who could know how you would respond to a situation where you lose your sight late in life. Something tells me that Slade might have been a cranky guy anyway. Go watch the film, you'll understand. And that brings us to another of my favorites. It was right between Cuckoo's Nest and As Good as It Gets for me. Again, both Nicholson films. 1997, it won Nicholson his third Oscar for playing Melvin Udall, the cranky, cantankerous novelist with obsessive-compulsive disorder. And as someone who struggles with OCD personally, I did identify on many levels with this character. It was not a parody. It was realistic. And it was something that I thought, wow, look at how he handles it. And look at and for a lot of folks with OCD, at the time, this was not something that was very well understood. People who locked and unlocked their doors a lot and washed their hands until they were raw were just called crazy, and that's obviously not acceptable. Largely, Nicholson's depiction is considered to be very accurate, and despite his character's personal eccentricities and pretty obnoxious behavior. But his role, if you Google OCD and As Good as It Gets, you're going to find countless studies, papers, peer reviews on subjects like OCD. And it brought a lot of attention and public awareness to, at the time, a pretty mysterious mental health disorder. So that's right up there for me. And again, a lot of Oscar acclaim for that film. Mm-hmm. But it just speaks to the importance of telling these stories, I think, no matter how they're told. Preferably, if the story is inclined towards it, cast someone with the disability to play the role. When it's not possible, then by all means, tell the story accurately and tell it with passion and tell it through characters that are sympathetic, that are portrayed accurately, and that people can identify with.
Yeah, and there are a few ways that if you're creating a film or if you're creating any kind of content to make them inclusive or diverse. Hire minorities. We talked about that, right? So include actors, directors, crew. The Academy is trying to, incentivize that with their new rules starting 2024. Again, for if the discussion on that, if you go back to our episode 1, we discussed those in a little more depth. Watch for stereotypes and call them out. So if you see a stereotype, if you're making a film or a stage production or anything like that, and you see a stereotype, don't be afraid to call it out and bring it up to the director or bring it up to somebody in the crew that you can bring this to light. So then and have a diverse group review the script. So if you've got a script, have folks of different communities read it and make sure that you're representing them correctly, and there's no stereotypes included. Listen, be open and to honest criticism. Yeah. Someone comes up to you and says, this makes me uncomfortable. I think this doesn't represent us well. Be open to it. Be open to change. Be open to listen, to hear other people's viewpoints. And finally, broaden your horizons. Feature minority groups in filmmaking and writing. Learn about their histories. One of the themes throughout this whole thing that Matt and I have talked about is research. Do your research. Make sure that you understand the group you're representing in the film, to make sure that when they, people in that group view it, they can relate to it, they can understand it, and that people that maybe aren't in that group can learn something, and we can come to these levels of cooperation that we need to kind of advance as a people.
Yeah, I think that's the whole point, is that especially as artists, it's not about avoiding offense. It's not about making sure people will always get offended. What it's about is accuracy. Mm-hmm. We want to be accurate. We want to tell stories the best way that we can. And if that means casting different people than you initially considered, well, then do that and be open-minded to it. Part of the reason that Heilman and Haver even exists, and that you're listening right now, we hope, is that you want to see the community of actors and the community of artists just grow and expand. Mm-hmm. And the more opportunities we have to cast and have folks behind the scenes that from a diverse background, the bigger the community gets. And we've learned that recently, again, with our discussion with folks all the way down in Orlando from the OCA Running Man Theater Company. We really encourage you to listen to that interview. They're doing some work that we would love to see spread all across the country. And we'd love to see more special needs folks being cast in shows, whether it's community level or all the way down in Hollywood. And also, again, December 18th, Sarah Summers, an actress in LA. She's going to be joining us to talk about her Hollywood journey and about her experiences with body positivity or lack thereof on both stage and screen. So we're looking forward to that viewpoint.
All right. Well, thanks again for watching. We appreciate your time. And
time to head back to Wakanda, I think.
That's right, yeah.
Thanks for joining us on Heilman and Haver in the Mix. We'll see you again real soon. Thanks for watching.